Tuesday morning greeted me with the usual ritual of a cup of strong coffee and a newspaper on the porch of my Wilmington home. The May sun was already warming, and I enjoyed the silence, broken only by the birds and the rustling leaves of an old maple tree. At 65, I've learned to appreciate moments like this. My musings were interrupted by the ringing of the phone. Randall's number on the screen evoked mixed feelings joy at the call from my only son and anxiety. In recent years, our conversations had become infrequent and strained. Mom, are you home? Randall's voice sounded unusually enthusiastic. Good morning, dear. Yes, I'm on the porch with coffee. Oh, that's great. We have news. Vanessa got a promotion at the insurance company. She's now the deputy head of the corporate client department. Congratulations, I said, trying to sound sincere. Give her my best wishes. I will. Listen, we want to celebrate, and we're taking you to dinner this Friday. At the Hutton Reserve, you know the one? I almost choked on my coffee. Hutton Reserve is my flagship restaurant, the first in a chain I started 20 years ago. Of course, Randall didn't know that. None of my family knew I owned a chain of 7 restaurants in 3 states. Yeah, I've heard of it, I replied cautiously. Pretty expensive place, Randall. Mom, don't worry about money. Vanessa and I will pay for it, he said, a condescending tone in his voice that I was beginning to notice more and more often. You don't have to worry about anything. I suppressed a sigh. My son thought of me as a poor old woman living on a modest pension. Part of it was my fault. I'd never told him about my business. First, I didn't want him to grow up spoiled. Then I kept putting off the right time. And after he married Vanessa, the wall between us only grew. Okay, honey. What time? 7 o'clock tonight. I've booked a table for 4. Zoe will be there. The thought of seeing my 15-year-old granddaughter made me feel a little better. Although lately even she's been looking at me through her mother's eyes. After the call, I returned to the kitchen where I experimented with a new recipe for goat cheese tartlets with caramelized onions for Hatton Reserve's spring menu. Cooking has always helped me think, and there was a lot to think about. The day Randall first brought Vanessa to my house came to mind. That was 10 years ago. The slender, brown-haired girl with the perfect manicure and a bag with more designer logos than leather was looking around my house with poorly concealed disappointment. Very cozy, she said then, and I knew immediately it wasn't a compliment. Later, I heard her whisper to Randall in the kitchen, "You said your mom was a chef. I thought they made good money." I didn't bother to explain that my modest house in the old part of Wilmington cost more than she'd make in 10 years. I didn't tell her that I prefer to invest in quality rather than ostentatious glitz, that my sofa without a fancy label but custom made from the finest leather would last longer than 3 of their kind, that the antique dresser in the living room once belonged to the Vanderbilt family. I never liked to brag and saw no point in dissuading my sister-in-law. Eventually, I realized it was a mistake. Over the next few years, Vanessa methodically turned Randall against me. It started with little things. She forgot to invite me to family gatherings, found excuses to cancel Zoe's visits, and constantly commented on my old-fashioned closet. "Mom, why don't you buy yourself a new car?" Randall would ask me after another family dinner. "Your Volvo is 8 years old." "It drives great and is very reliable," I replied, not explaining that the car was a means of transportation, not a status symbol. "Gloria, at your age, you should pamper yourself," Vanessa interjected with fake concern. "If money is an issue, we could help." I remember then 10-year-old Zoe watching this conversation intently, absorbing every word and look. 3 years ago, the situation reached a peak when Vanessa generously offered to move me into a nursing home that she said was within my means. "It's really nice there, Gloria," she assured me. "And you won't be lonely, and your house could be sold to cover expenses." The house she wanted me to sell was fully paid for and worth 3 times as much now as when I'd bought it 25 years ago. But Vanessa saw only old furniture and a lack of fancy gadgets. I politely declined, and since then, our relationship had become even more strained. Visits dwindled to 1 or 2 a year, phone calls to formal holiday greetings. The last time I saw them was Christmas, and it was a farce. Vanessa gave me a scarf with a big logo of a fashion brand, which she didn't fail to tell me cost a fortune. "To make you look more modern," she said, eyeing my simple wool dress. The scarf was garishly red and completely out of my style. I thanked her and put it in the closet where it still lay untouched. My gifts, homemade cookies and a hand-knitted sweater for Zoe, were met with condescending smiles. "Grandma, you didn't have to splurge," Zoe said in a tone clearly copied from her mother. "I could have just asked my parents to buy me a sweater at the mall." I didn't bother to tell her that the yarn for that sweater cost more than her entire mass market closet and that I knit it in the evenings between business meetings and checking my restaurant's financial statements. The tartlets in the oven exuded the aroma of caramelized onions, bringing me back to the present. I took out a baking tray and critically assessed the result. It wasn't perfect. The dough was a little too dry. Eddie wouldn't be happy. Eddie Tremaine had been my chef at Hutton Reserve since day one and one of the few people who knew the real me. We started in a small diner together 30 years ago, dreamed of our own restaurant together, went through the bankruptcy of our first project together and the triumph of our second. He'd been my mentor, my friend, and in recent years, after his wife's death and my divorce, something more, though we were both too busy and careful to define it. I picked up the phone and dialed his number. "Eddie, it's me. We're going to have an interesting situation on Friday." I told him about the upcoming dinner and asked him not to give me away. "Are you sure, Gloria?" he asked after a pause. "Maybe it's time they knew the truth." "Not like this, Eddie. I want to see how they behave in their natural environment, without the mask they put on when they know I'm watching." "Well, it's going to be an interesting evening," he hummed. "I promise Quentin and I will act like this is the first time we've seen you. It's going to be damn hard, though." After we talked, I went out into the garden and sat on a bench under an old apple tree. Why had I kept my success from my son for so long? At first, it seemed like the right thing to do. I didn't want him to grow up feeling like he was owed everything. I wanted him to learn the value of hard work and to earn his own money. When he was a teenager, I was still building my business, and we did live modestly. Then Randall went off to college, then married Vanessa, and the moment for a frank conversation kept slipping away. Over the years, it had become a habit to just be mom or mother-in-law Gloria to them, rather than a successful businesswoman. But now I felt that this game had gone too far. I was tired of the condescending looks, the offers of financial help, the fact that my gifts were considered grandma's crafts. I'm tired of Zoe growing up with the belief that her grandmother is a loser with nothing to offer the modern world. Could this dinner at Hutton Reserve be the moment I've been waiting for? An opportunity to set the record straight once and for all? I walked back into the house and made my way to the dressing room. What to wear to this dinner? My gaze slid down the row of clothing racks. Classic pants and blouses, a few dresses for business meetings, evening gowns for charity balls and restaurant openings, nothing flashy, no logos in prominent places. I've always favored quality and good fit over flashy labels. For Friday night's dinner, I chose a simple navy blue dress made of Italian silk. To the untrained eye, it looked unremarkable, but anyone who knew fashion could appreciate its impeccable cut and quality of fabric. I knew Vanessa would only see the lack of a logo and the boring color. It was perfect for my purpose, to see how they acted when they thought I was still the same poor old Gloria. And then we'll see what happens next. Friday came faster than I expected. All week I had been immersed in work, phone meetings with managers of other chain restaurants, meetings with vendors, reviewing financial reports. Business demanded my attention, and it helped to not get too caught up in the upcoming family dinner. By 5 o'clock in the evening, I had finished all my business and started getting ready. In the bathroom, I examined my reflection in the mirror, the wrinkles around my eyes, the gray strands in my brown hair. Age had left its marks, but I didn't fight it desperately like Vanessa did with her 38 years. No Botox, no fillers, just quality skincare and a healthy lifestyle. I styled my hair in a simple but elegant style, did a discreet makeup that emphasized my eyes. I wore the dark blue dress I'd chosen, complete with a single piece of jewelry, a string of pearls I'd inherited from my mother. Only a connoisseur could appreciate the quality of these pearls, no conspicuous diamonds or gold. At 7:30, I was fully ready. Glancing at my watch, I decided to call Eddie again to make sure everything was ready for our little performance. "Gloria," his voice sounded tired but warm. "Everything's under control. I've briefed the staff. To your family, you're just another guest. Quentin will be your waiter, but I've warned him to keep a natural demeanor. Thank you, Eddie. How's the new menu? Are all the dishes worked out? He grinned. You never stop being the boss, do you? Even when you're trying to pretend you're not. Old habits are hard to change, I smiled, though he couldn't see it. It's all worked out. The team's on full alert. Your table is ready for you. The best view of the garden. I told the maitre d' that these are very important guests. Don't overdo it, I warned. Vanessa mustn't get suspicious before it's too late. Don't worry. To them, you'll just be a family celebrating a promotion. After talking to Eddie, I went down to the garage. My 8-year-old Volvo looked unremarkable, but it was perfectly maintained and serviced. I could afford any car I wanted, but I preferred reliability and safety over ostentatious glitz. Vanessa thought it was a sign of tight finances. So be it. I pulled onto the road, heading toward the center of town where the Hutton Reserve was located. The radio played classical music, and I sank into my memories. 25 years ago, I was a regular chef in a middle-class restaurant. Divorced, with a 15-year-old son in my arms, I worked 16 hours a day to provide for us and put away for college for Randall. Back then, I didn't even dream of owning my own restaurant. That all changed when Warren Blake, a well-known restaurant critic, walked into our restaurant. He liked my food so much that he wrote a rave review. A week later, the owner of another, more prestigious restaurant offered me the position of chef with double the salary. I accepted, and the next 5 years were a time of hard work and learning. I soaked up all the knowledge I could about cooking and the restaurant business, saving every extra dollar I could. Randall had gone to college by then, and I could focus fully on my career. When I turned 45, I finally dared to open my first restaurant with Eddie, who was the sous chef at the same establishment. We called it Hutton Reserve, after my maiden name. The first year was challenging, but our cuisine was quickly recognized. 3 years later, we opened a second restaurant, then a third. Now, 20 years later, Hutton Gastronomy included 7 restaurants in 3 states, a catering service, and a culinary school. I had gone from a simple cook to a successful businesswoman with a fortune in the millions. And all these years, I've kept the extent of my success from my family. At first for pedagogical reasons, so Randall wouldn't grow up spoiled. Then out of habit and busyness. And after he married Vanessa, because of the growing gap between us and my stubbornness. I realized I was partly to blame for the situation, but I was increasingly annoyed by my sister-in-law's arrogant attitude, who judged people solely on the basis of their external signs of wealth. Thinking about it, I did not notice how I reached the restaurant, parking my car in the regular parking lot rather than the owner's special parking lot at the back of the building. I paused for a moment, gazing at the facade of the Hutton Reserve, a classic 3-story red brick building built in the early 20th century, with an elegant sign and well-tended floral arrangements at the entrance. Nothing flashy, just impeccable taste and quality in every detail, as in everything I did. I sighed and glanced at the clock. It was 15 to 7. I had arrived early to prepare myself mentally for the evening ahead. At the same time, on the other side of town, in a 2-story house in a new upscale neighborhood, Vanessa Hutton was spinning in front of her bedroom mirror, meticulously scrutinizing her reflection. "Do you think this dress is spectacular enough?" she asked her husband, who was tying his tie while standing by the dresser. Randall Hutton, a 40-year-old man with thinning hair and a small belly, nodded, barely glancing at his wife. "You look beautiful, darling." Vanessa adjusted the bright red dress with a large designer logo on the waist and sighed expressively. "I hope your mother doesn't wear that awful tweed suit she wore at Christmas. In a place like Hutton Reserve, that would just be unseemly." Randall frowned. "Vanessa, let's not get started. Mom dresses how she feels comfortable. And what she can afford," Vanessa added with a slight chuckle. "Don't get me wrong, I don't blame her. At her age and with her means, but there are inexpensive stores with decent clothes. I've even offered to help her choose, but she's so stubborn." Randall sighed, but didn't say anything. Arguing with his wife was useless, especially when it came to his mother. In 10 years of marriage, he'd gotten used to being the peacemaker between the two women, and it was wearing him down. "Did you order a cab?" Vanessa changed the subject. "Yeah, it'll be here at 7. We still have time. Great. She pulled out of her jewelry box a pair of solid gold earrings with the same brand logo as the dress. I hope the staff at Hutton Reserve really is as good as they say. This is a big night for me. I'm sure everything will be great. Randall smiled strainedly. Is Zoe ready? I'll go check on her. Vanessa headed for the door but stopped. By the way, I got my mom a present from us. A Gucci scarf. At least she'll have something decent to wear. Another one? Randall was surprised. I don't think she ever wore the Christmas one. Because she doesn't understand the value of such things, Vanessa said. But the people at Hutton Reserve will. I don't want us to be judged by what your mother looks like. When Vanessa walked out, Randall sank heavily to the edge of the bed. He had once been closer to his mother, admiring her hard work and resilience. But years of listening to Vanessa, her constant comments about his mother's outdated views, her impracticality and inability to live in the modern world had taken their toll. Now he saw Gloria through his wife's eyes as a sweet but hopelessly retired old lady who needed their indulgent care. He looked at the picture on his dresser, him and his mother at his college graduation. Gloria looked tired but proud. She'd worked hard to pay for his education. A prick of conscience made him grimace. Maybe he visited her too infrequently. Maybe he should take more interest in her life? From Zoe's room came Vanessa's irritated exclamation. Are you going to wear this to Hutton Reserve? Change your clothes immediately. The moment of doubt passed. Randall stood up, adjusted his tie, and went to deal with another conflict. In 15-year-old Zoe's room, a drama of her own was unfolding. But I like this t-shirt, protested, clutching a black t-shirt with an indie band on it to her chest. It's inappropriate for a restaurant like this. Vanessa held up a pink frilly dress. Put this on. We're going somewhere decent, not fast food. I look like a 10-year-old in this. Zoe grinned. But like a decent 10-year-old, not like a... Vanessa paused when she saw her husband enter. Randall, tell your daughter she can't wear a t-shirt to Hutton Reserve. Zoe, listen to your mother, Randall said tiredly. Tonight's a big night for her. Let's all try to make it go smoothly. Zoe rolled her eyes but took the dress. Okay. Is Grandma going to dress up too? Or will she come in her usual old lady look? Don't say that about Grandma, Randall said automatically but without much conviction. Why not? You and Mom are always talking about how weird she dresses and lives. Zoe shrugged. Yesterday, Mom was saying her house was like a museum of old things. Vanessa threw a warning glance at her husband. Your grandmother just has different opportunities and tastes. We're not discussing this to judge her, but to figure out how to help her. You're discussing how she's a relic of the past, Zoe said bluntly. How she doesn't understand modern life. How she's backward. How she lives a life of boredom and poverty. Zoe, Vanessa exclaimed. What terrible things you say. Only what I hear you say, the girl replied, and disappeared into the bathroom with her dress in her hands. Vanessa turned to her husband. Do you see what's happening? She's getting so straightforward. It's age. Teenagers always exaggerate. Randall nodded, but an inner voice told him that Zoe was right. They had indeed often discussed his mother in a less than flattering light. And maybe Zoe was just repeating their own words without the adult packaging of false concern and condescension. He pushed the thought away. Tonight was Vanessa's evening of triumph, and he didn't want to cloud it with unpleasant reflections. At 8:30, a cab brought the Hutton family to the Hutton Reserve. Vanessa noted with satisfaction the impressive facade and the elegantly dressed customers entering the restaurant. I hope your mother is here and won't keep us waiting, she said, as she got out of the car and adjusted her dress. It was considered bad manners in a place like this. Randall was silent. Zoe in the pink dress looked unaccustomedly feminine, but her frown spoiled the impression. Smile, darling, Vanessa whispered to her. We're going to the best restaurant in town. They didn't know that the owner of this best restaurant in town was already sitting inside, watching their arrival through the large window and preparing for an evening that would change their family dynamic forever. I arrived at Hutton Reserve first and asked the maitre d' to escort me to my reserved table without calling names. Sitting in a cozy corner overlooking the garden and entrance, I sipped my mineral water and contemplated the evening ahead. My dark blue dress fit perfectly into the elegant atmosphere of the restaurant I had created. Nothing flashy, just quality materials, sophisticated design, and attention to detail. Like the restaurant itself, I exuded an understated elegance that Vanessa would likely mistake for modesty of means. Through the window, I saw a cab pull up and Randall, Vanessa, and Zoe got out. Vanessa was wearing a bright red dress with a large logo on the waistband, exactly the kind of outfit I'd expected to see. Randall looked tense and Zoe was clearly uncomfortable in a girly pink dress with ruffles. I took a deep breath, preparing myself for an evening that promised to be challenging. In 20 years, I'd built a successful business, gone through a divorce, and raised my son without help. I've dealt with crises, competitors, and critics. But somehow the prospect of a family dinner made me more nervous than any of these challenges. I watched as the maitre d' led my family to our table. Vanessa walked with her head held high like a queen arriving at a ball. Her bright red dress with the screaming logo stood out among the understated elegance of the other diners. Randall followed her with a strained smile, and Zoe trailed behind, clearly uncomfortable in her frilly pink dress. As they approached, I stood up to greet them. "There you are, Mom." Randall leaned over and kissed me awkwardly on the cheek. He smelled of expensive cologne, which I was sure Vanessa had picked out. "Gloria." Vanessa nodded, barely touching her cheek to mine. "Have you been here long?" "Just a few minutes," I replied, smiling. "Hello, Zoe." My granddaughter mumbled a greeting without raising her eyes. I remembered when she was little and ran to me with open arms. Now there was a wall between us, built of Vanessa's daily comments about my retardedness. We sat down at a table and a waiter approached us, introducing himself and offering an aperitif. Vanessa gave him an appraising glance, as if checking to see if he was worthy of serving such an important person. "A bottle of champagne," she said. "We're celebrating my promotion tonight. What do you recommend?" "We have a fine selection of champagnes," the waiter replied. "The Dom Perignon from the 2000th year is especially good tonight." "Great!" Vanessa didn't even ask about the price. I knew she was doing it deliberately to impress me. The waiter nodded and left, and Vanessa turned to me with an expression of feigned concern. "Gloria, if you'd prefer something else." "Champagne would be perfect for the party," I replied calmly. "Congratulations on your promotion, Vanessa." "Thank you." She squared her shoulders. "It was expected. I had led a project to bring in a major client, and my efforts were appreciated. I'm now the deputy head of the department." "That's wonderful." I smiled sincerely. Despite our complicated relationship, I couldn't help but respect her work ethic. "You must have worked hard." "Oh yeah," Vanessa picked up the menu. "Not everyone is lucky enough to just cook food all their lives. In the corporate world, you have to constantly prove your worth." I ignored the jab. In 10 years, I'd gotten used to her condescending comments about my career as a chef. She never realized that cooking requires as much dedication, creativity, and management skills as an office job. The waiter returned with champagne, professionally opened the bottle, and poured it into glasses. Vanessa took a big sip, not even appreciating the bouquet, and went back to studying the menu. "Oh, everything looks so appetizing here," she said deliberately loud, "though the prices are impressive." She looked at me with feigned concern. "Gloria, don't worry about the cost. Tonight is our treat." "Thank you, Vanessa." I kept my composure, though I was boiling inside. "That's very generous of you." Randall coughed awkwardly and raised his glass. "To your promotion, my dear." We clinked glasses, and I noticed Zoe barely tasted her mineral water glass as she continued to study her surroundings. There was curiosity in her eyes, which Vanessa tried to suppress. "What did you think of the restaurant, Zoe?" I asked my granddaughter. "It's beautiful," she answered laconically. "And quiet. Not like the places we usually go." "That's because it's haute cuisine, honey," Vanessa interjected. "Not like the fast food your grandmother likes." I raised an eyebrow in surprise. "I can't remember the last time I ate fast food, Vanessa." "Well, you know what I mean." She waved it away. "Simple food, like those casseroles you always make at Christmas." My Christmas casserole was a family recipe passed down through generations with truffles and foie gras. But Vanessa only saw home-cooked food with no restaurant presentation. The waiter returned to take our order. "We'll start with the signature scallop carpaccio," Vanessa said without consulting the others. "Then I'll have the filet mignon, medium rare." Mentally, I wrinkled my nose. Filet mignon was the least interesting dish on our menu, a banal choice for those who wanted to show that they could afford expensive meat, but didn't know about real haute cuisine. "For me, please, seasonal vegetable risotto with truffle," I said. It was a new dish that Eddie and I had added to the menu a week ago, and I was curious as to how it would be served. "Risotto?" Vanessa gave Randall an expressive look. "But there's such a fine selection of steaks and seafood here, Gloria. Are you sure you want to just rice?" "I prefer risotto," I replied calmly. "It's one of my favorite dishes." "If you say so," Vanessa turned to the waiter again. "And we'll have a bottle of red wine. What do you recommend with my steak?" The waiter offered several options, and Vanessa chose the most expensive wine, again without asking about the price. Randall ordered the salmon and Zoe chose the pasta, though Vanessa tried to convince her to get something more gourmet. When the waiter left, Vanessa turned to me again. "Gloria, I noticed you're wearing the same pearl necklace you wore at Christmas. Is it a family heirloom?" "Yes," I answered. "It belonged to my mother." "How nice." She smiled indulgently. Vintage jewelry is back in fashion right now, although, of course, modern brands offer more impressive options. She defiantly adjusted the massive gold earrings with the logo. I knew it was fake. We'd had customers at the restaurant with real jewelry from that brand, and it looked different. But I kept my mouth shut. "Mom always preferred simple things," Randall interjected, obviously trying to smooth over the awkwardness. "She was never interested in fashion." "I value quality and durability," I clarified. "Some things don't need logos to be valuable." Vanessa frowned slightly, clearly catching the stiletto, but quickly returned a smile to her face. "By the way, Gloria, we brought you a gift." She pulled a small box from her bag, wrapped in branded paper. "Open it." I unwrapped the package and found a scarf very similar to the one they'd given me for Christmas, only in a different color. It was bright blue with a large logo of the same brand as Vanessa's earrings. "To freshen up your closet," she explained. "That color is on trend right now." "Thank you." I folded the scarf neatly and put it in my bag. "It's very colorful." "You could wear it right now," Vanessa suggested with a bit of pressure. "It would go better with your dress than those pearls." "I prefer to save it for a special occasion," I replied diplomatically. Vanessa sighed, exchanging an expressive look with Randall, as if to say, "See how hard it is to please her?" He shrugged with a guilty smile. The appetizers arrived, and Vanessa immediately started taking pictures of the food for social media. "Gotta show everyone we're at Hutton Reserve," she explained as she picked a filter. Sandra from accounting would be bursting with envy. I tried the carpaccio. It was excellent, as always. Eddie didn't fail. As we ate, Vanessa continued to talk about her promotion, the reaction of her coworkers, the envy of her competitors. Randall chimed in and looked genuinely proud of his wife. "What's new with you, Gloria?" Vanessa suddenly asked with fake interest. "How are your days going?" "Pretty busy," I answered evasively. "Working on new recipes, reading, and sometimes seeing friends." "Friends?" Vanessa looked surprised, as if she couldn't imagine that I could have a social life. "That's wonderful. At your age, it's so important not to be isolated." "At my age," I repeated with a slight smile. "A lot of people are just starting to really live, Vanessa. When the children are grown, there's time for yourself." "But it must still be lonely in that big old house." She shook her head. "Randall and I often think about it. Don't we, darling?" Randall nodded uncertainly. "Well, not that often." "All the time," Vanessa insisted. "Especially now that we're thinking of moving to a more upscale neighborhood. Your house requires so much maintenance, Gloria, and it's in such an old neighborhood." "I like my neighborhood," I said quietly. "It's quiet, with character, and the house doesn't need much maintenance at all after the renovations." "Renovations?" Vanessa looked skeptical. "You mean painting the walls 5 years ago?" "That's hardly a renovation, Gloria. I didn't bother to explain that 2 years ago I'd completely renovated the kitchen, bathrooms, and heating system. Vanessa only saw what she wanted to see, an old house with no fancy design elements." The main courses arrived, and I was pleased to note that my risotto looked and smelled delicious. Eddie had added parmesan foam and microgreens to it, elegant and tasteful. Vanessa started taking pictures of the food again, but suddenly stopped and looked at my plate. Gloria, your risotto looks so, simple compared to our dishes. Are you sure you don't want to try my steak? I could share. No, thank you. I tasted the risotto. It's exactly what I wanted. Whatever you say. She shrugged and cut off a piece of her filet mignon. Divine. Worth every cent. She looked at me meaningfully again, as if to emphasize that I couldn't afford such a luxury. Speaking of cents, Vanessa continued, sipping her wine, with the promotion, we can finally afford that SUV we've been dreaming about, and maybe start looking at a house in North Wilmington. North Wilmington? I knew the neighborhood. New nouveau riche homes with minimal lots and as much gilt and marble as possible. Interesting choice. The most successful people in the city live there. Vanessa clearly mistook my comment for envy. Houses start at $1 million. I've heard that. I nodded. Though some people prefer older neighborhoods with history and character. History is no substitute for a second bathroom and a modern layout, Vanessa said. But of course, to each his own. Not everyone is lucky enough to have a choice. I ignored the jab again and turned to Zoe, who was silently eating her pasta. How's school, Zoe? Are you still doing photography? Not anymore, the girl answered without looking up. Mom said it wouldn't lead to a good career. Zoe's in the math club now, Vanessa intervened. It's much more promising. Photography is a hobby for those who can afford not to think about the future. I remembered how enthusiastically Zoe had shown me her photos 2 years ago. She had a real talent for seeing the extraordinary in the ordinary. Sometimes it pays to follow your passion, I said softly, especially at your age. Passion doesn't pay the bills, Vanessa said. I say this as someone who's built a successful career. Not everyone can just cook food for a lifetime. There was that condescending tone again. I was starting to lose my patience, but I held back. It wasn't the time for revelations. Success is different for everyone, Vanessa, I said calmly. And it's not just measured in money. Of course, she smiled sweetly. But you have to admit, it's more convenient with money. Take traveling, for example. Have you ever been to Europe, Gloria? Several times, I answered, remembering culinary tours in France and Italy, wine tastings in Spain, conferences in London. Really? Vanessa looked surprised. Randall had never mentioned it. When was that? In recent years, I didn't elaborate. Are you planning a trip? With the promotion, we can finally afford a real European vacation. Vanessa squared her shoulders. Paris, Milan, Rome, shopping in the best boutiques, dinners in Michelin-starred restaurants. Sounds delightful. I thought of the small family-run restaurants in the Italian countryside, where the food is better than in many Michelin-starred establishments. But I preferred not to share that knowledge. We could bring you a souvenir, Vanessa suggested generously. Something nice and inexpensive. That's very kind of you. I could barely contain my irritation. But you don't have to worry. Vanessa was about to say something, but Randall interrupted her. Mom, I've been meaning to ask you for a long time. Have you thought about selling the house? It's too big for you alone and it must be expensive to maintain. I looked at my son in surprise. Is he really suggesting I sell the house he grew up in? I'm comfortable there, Randall, and I can handle the expenses. But think about the future, he insisted, obviously influenced by Vanessa. At your age, you should think about a more manageable housing. At my age, I repeated slowly, I know exactly what's best for me, and it's certainly not selling the house I love. But real estate prices are at their peak right now, Vanessa interjected. You could get a good deal and buy something smaller. Or an apartment in an assisted living facility for the elderly. I'm 65, Vanessa, not 95. I was starting to lose my patience. And I don't need special care. Not yet. Vanessa looked at Randall meaningfully. But it's best to be prepared beforehand. Randall and I can't take care of you if something happens. We have careers, Zoe, plans of our own. I'm not asking you to take care of me, I said firmly. And I don't plan on being a burden to anyone. Vanessa was about to say something, but a waiter approached our table to take away the empty plates. He was followed by Quentin, my head waiter and right-hand man in the restaurant. I inwardly tensed. He was to play the role of a mere waiter who didn't know me. Quentin approached the table, holding a tray of desserts, and suddenly froze, looking at me. His eyes widened and a wide smile appeared on his face. "Miss Hutton!" he exclaimed with genuine surprise. "I didn't know you were dining with us tonight." It was as if an electric shock ran across the table. Randall and Vanessa froze with equally bewildered expressions on their faces. Zoe looked up, intrigued by the sudden change in tone. "Hello, Quentin." I nodded calmly, realizing that the moment of truth had come sooner than I'd planned. "As you can see, I've decided to have dinner with my family." "Of course, ma'am." Quentin looked embarrassed. "I'm sorry, I didn't mean to interrupt. It's just that you usually use the private entrance and—" "It's okay," I interrupted him gently, watching the confusion on my family's faces turn to shock. "Mom?" Randall frowned. "Have you met the waiter?" Before I could answer, Quentin smiled broadly. "Oh, we all know Miss Hutton. She's our—" "Quentin," I interrupted him again. "Why don't you ask Eddie to step outside for a moment? I think it's time for some explanations." "Of course, ma'am." Quentin put the desserts on the table and hurried into the kitchen. There was a heavy pause at the table. Vanessa looked from me to Randall, who looked confused. "What's going on?" Vanessa finally asked. "Why does the waiter know you? And why is he being so respectful?" I looked at my sister-in-law, allowing myself a slight smile for the first time that evening. "Because I'm his boss, Vanessa, the owner of this restaurant and the entire Hutton gastronomy chain." The silence that followed my words was absolute. Even the sounds in the restaurant seemed to have died down, though I knew they hadn't. "What?" Randall looked like I'd just told him I'd come from Mars. "You, own Hutton Reserve? But it's, the most prestigious restaurant in town?" I finished for him. "Yeah, and 6 other restaurants in 3 states, plus a catering service and a cooking school." Vanessa opened her mouth but didn't make a sound. Her face turned almost as red as her dress. Zoe looked at me with sudden interest, as if she was seeing me for the first time. "But you never told me," Randall muttered. "All these years?" "You never asked," I shrugged. "You knew I was a chef, but you weren't interested in what I'd been doing for the last 20 years. You preferred to think I was just an old woman living on a pension." "But," Vanessa finally found her voice, "but your house, your car, your clothes. What's wrong with them?" I raised an eyebrow. "They're so ordinary." Vanessa looked completely confused. "No, Vanessa," I shook my head. "They're high quality and comfortable. Just because they don't have big brand logos on them doesn't make them ordinary. My house is worth 1.5 times as much as any in North Wilmington because of the location and historical value. My car is one of the safest and most environmentally friendly on the market. And this dress," I ran my hand over the dark blue silk, "is worth more than your entire outfit, including those fake earrings." Vanessa aghast, instinctively grabbing at the jewelry. "They're not fake," I finished for her. "We have customers with real jewelry from this brand. They look completely different." At that moment, Eddie Tremaine, my chef and old friend, came out of the kitchen. In his immaculate white tunic with the Hutton Reserve logo embroidered on it, he looked imposing and elegant. His gray hair was neatly combed and sparks of amusement sparkled in his eyes. "Gloria," he came to our table and shook my hand gently. "I take it the secret's out?" Thanks to Quentin's enthusiasm, I smiled. "Eddie, I'd like you to meet my family. My son Randall, his wife Vanessa, and my granddaughter Zoe." Eddie nodded politely, but I could see that he could barely contain a smile at the sight of their stunned faces. "It's nice to finally meet Gloria's family," he said. "She's told us so much about you." "We haven't heard anything about you," Vanessa said harshly. "No wonder." Eddie smiled softly. "Gloria's always been modest. Even when we got our first Michelin star, she refused to be interviewed and insisted that all the glory be attributed to me." "Michelin star?" Randall looked like he'd been hit over the head. "This restaurant has a Michelin star?" 5 years ago, Eddie confirmed. "Thanks to your mother's culinary genius." It was our job together, Eddie, I countered softly. I could never have done it without you. Eddie smiled warmly at me, and I noticed Vanessa shift her gaze from him to me, obviously noticing our closeness. So you two are, partners? She asked, choosing her words. In every way, Eddie answered before I could intervene. We started in a little diner together 30 years ago, opened this restaurant together, been through the ups and downs together, and all this time you've kept it from us. Randall looked hurt. Why, Mom? I took a deep breath. At first, I didn't want you to grow up to be a spoiled child who thought he owed everything because of his mother's money. Then I was too busy growing my business, and in the last few years, I looked at Vanessa. It became obvious that some members of our family judge people solely by the trappings of wealth. I wanted to be valued for who I am, not what I own. But that's not fair, Vanessa exclaimed. You have allowed us to think that you are poor? A loser? I finished for her. Those were your conclusions based on superficial observations. You never really tried to get to know me. Wait. Zoe, who had been listening in silence until then, suddenly intervened. Grandma, did you name your restaurant with your maiden name? Hutton Reserve? I smiled at my granddaughter, pleasantly surprised by her observation. Yes, Zoe, Hutton is my maiden name. When I divorced your grandfather, I took it back. So Hutton Gastronomy is named after you? Zoe continued. That's awesome. Thank you, honey. I smiled, seeing the genuine admiration in her eyes. Vanessa sat with a frozen expression on her face, clearly trying to comprehend what was happening. Randall looked lost, shifting his gaze from me to Eddie and back again. So all these years, he said slowly, when we thought you were barely making ends meet, you were actually a successful businesswoman, Eddie finished for him. One of the most respected restaurateurs on the East Coast. Everyone in the culinary industry knows her name. But why do you live so modest? Vanessa still couldn't understand. With that kind of money, you could— What? I interrupted her. Live in a house with marble columns? Wear clothes with flashy logos? Drive a car that costs as much as a small house? Why, Vanessa? To impress someone? To prove your worth? Vanessa blushed, clearly recognizing her own priorities in my words. I prefer to invest in quality and comfort, rather than ostentatious glitz, I continued. My home is comfortable and fully modernized, though you didn't notice it. My clothes are made of the finest fabrics and will last longer than a dozen fancy outfits. My car is safe and reliable, which is far more important than a prestigious badge on the hood. There was a pause. Vanessa sat with downcast eyes, clearly not knowing what to say. Randall looked like a man trying to put the pieces of a puzzle together. All these years, he murmured. You've let us, me, think you needed our help, letting Vanessa say those things. I was hoping you'd stand up for me, Randall, I said softly. Not because I'm rich or successful, but because I'm your mother. But you chose to take the position of an observer. Randall lowered his eyes, clearly ashamed. So how much is your company worth, Gloria? Vanessa suddenly asked, taking the offensive. If you're so successful— The last valuation was about $30 million, Eddie replied calmly. But Gloria turned down a purchase offer from a major restaurant group. She prefers to keep her independence and quality. Vanessa gasped, and Randall dropped his fork. 30 million? Vanessa whispered. But that's just a number, I finished for her. What matters is what we've created with Eddie. Restaurants that make people feel at home, meals that are memorable for a lifetime, a team of professionals who love what they do. And it's all thanks to Gloria, Eddie added proudly. She is a true leader, strict but fair, demanding but inspiring. Every employee at Hutton Gastronomy is willing to follow her through fire and water. And I thought she just made cookies and knitted sweaters, Zoe muttered, looking at me with a new respect. I still make cookies and knit sweaters, honey, I smiled. It's what I like to do in my free time. But yes, most of the day I run the business. So that's why you were always busy when we asked you to come, Randall began to understand. Not because you were sitting at home alone, but because you were working. Exactly, I nodded. I have meetings with suppliers, tastings of new dishes, negotiations with investors. It's a pretty tight schedule. And that's why you traveled to Europe, Vanessa added, clearly remembering our recent conversation. Not just as a tourist, but for work, I confirmed. Culinary tours, wine tastings, conferences. Of course, I made time for pleasure, too. Eddie smiled and put his hand on my shoulder. Gloria, I have to get back to the kitchen. The desserts are getting cold. Of course. I covered his hand with mine. Thank you, Eddie. When he left, the table was silent again. Vanessa sat there looking like she'd swallowed a lemon. Randall looked shocked and embarrassed. Zoe looked from her parents to me, clearly enjoying the situation. So, Vanessa finally said, trying to maintain at least a semblance of dignity. All these years you've been pretending to be poor in order to… What? To test us? I never pretended to be poor, Vanessa. I shook my head. I was just being me. You're the one who thought that no ostentatious wealth meant poverty. That quality but discreet things meant limited means. That modesty and restraint were signs of failure. And now what? Randall looked uncertain. What does it change? A lot of things. I looked at my son. First of all, I won't tolerate condescension anymore. Not from anyone. Second, I think we all need to rethink our relationships and our priorities. How about… Vanessa licked her lips. What about the inheritance? Randall's still… I couldn't hold back a bitter laugh. That's it. The first question was about money. Not about how I built the business, not about why I hid it all these years, but about what you'll get when I die. Vanessa at least had the decency to look ashamed. I didn't mean that. She tried to justify herself. That's exactly what I meant, I interrupted her. And to answer your question, yes, I will revise my will, in light of everything I've learned about my family's values. Randall turned pale. Mom, we've never treated me with the respect I deserve? I finished for him. Never took an interest in my life? Never defended me from disrespectful comments? I agree. Vanessa looked like she was about to cry, but I knew it wasn't out of remorse, but out of dashed hopes for an inheritance. Gloria, she made one last attempt, we've always meant well. If we've been harsh at times, it's only out of concern. Stop it, Vanessa, I held up my hand. We both know that's not true. You spent 10 years looking down on me. You thought I was a loser, mocked my lifestyle, and turned my son and granddaughter against me. Zoe giggled suddenly, but quickly covered her mouth with her hand when Vanessa threw her an annihilating glare. Well, I straightened up. I think that's enough revelations for today. Desserts get cold and they're delicious when served at the right temperature. I took a spoon and tasted the chocolate fondant. The melting core with caramel filling was perfect. Eddie, as always, had outdone himself. Divine, I smiled. Eddie had been experimenting with this recipe for weeks. No one else had touched the desserts. Vanessa sat stone-faced, Randall looked lost, and only Zoe tentatively tasted her fondant. Delicious, she nodded with genuine admiration. Grandma, do you cook for the restaurant? Not anymore, dear, I smiled at my granddaughter. Eddie and his team do a better job, but I participate in the menu development and sometimes experiment with new recipes. Cool, Zoe was clearly impressed. Can I see the kitchen sometime? Sure, I nodded. Come over anytime. I think Eddie would be happy to show you how a professional kitchen works. Zoe, Vanessa intervened sharply, you should be concentrating on your studies, not on cooking. Why? Zoe objected openly to her mother for the first time that evening. Grandma built a successful cooking business. 30 million, Mom. That sounds like quite a career. Vanessa looked like she'd been punched. I couldn't help but smile. It's not just about the money, Zoe, I said softly. It's about passion for what you do. It's about wanting to create something special, seeing the joy on people's faces when they taste your food, building a team of like-minded people. How's the photography? Zoe asked, giving her mother a defiant look. Absolutely, I nodded. If you have a passion for photography, you should pursue it. Not every hobby should become a profession, but you should never give up something that brings you joy. Vanessa looked like she wanted to say something but held back, apparently realizing that her position was shaken. Well, I set my napkin aside. It's been informative, but I gotta go. I have an early meeting with the vendors tomorrow. You're leaving? Randall looked confused. But there's so much we haven't discussed yet, and we'll have time for that, I nodded. But not tonight. Today, I think we all need to process what happened. I got up from the table. Vanessa sat with her eyes downcast, clearly not knowing how to react. Her world had been turned upside down, and she hadn't yet decided what strategy to take. Randall looked guilty and confused. Zoe looked at me with renewed respect and curiosity. Don't worry about the bill, I added with a slight smile. My treat tonight. I turned to leave but stopped and added, and Vanessa, thank you for the scarf. But I'm afraid it's not really my style. Maybe you can find a better use for it. With those words, I headed for the exit, leaving the table in stunned silence. As I passed the bar, Eddie came out of the kitchen and joined me. How did it go? He asked quietly. About as well as I expected, I replied. Shock, disbelief, and then the immediate question about the inheritance. Eddie shook his head. You deserve better than that, Gloria. I know. I took his hand in mine. That's why I have you. We walked out the front door, leaving my family to digest the fact that poor old Gloria was a successful businesswoman with a fortune in the millions. The next morning greeted me with the usual ritual of a strong cup of coffee on the veranda. The May sun was already warming up, but I felt light at heart, as if I had shed the heavy weight I had been carrying all these years. Last night at Hutton Reserve had changed everything. The phone rang as I was pouring my second cup. Randall's name on the screen didn't come as a surprise. I'd been expecting this call. Good morning, Randall, I answered calmly. Mom, his voice sounded strained. We need to talk about yesterday. I agree, but not over the phone. Okay, he paused. Can I come over? Alone, without Vanessa. It was unexpected but nice. Sure, I'll expect you at lunch. After the call, I sat down at my laptop to check the morning's restaurant reports. Work always kept me focused. Numbers don't lie, don't pretend, don't have ulterior motives. At exactly noon, the doorbell rang. Randall stood on the threshold, looking unaccustomedly confused. He was holding a bouquet of white lilies, my favorite flowers. Hi, Mom. He awkwardly held out the bouquet. I remembered that you like lilies. Thank you. I accepted the flowers and stepped back, letting him into the house. Come on in. Randall walked in and stopped in the living room, looking around like he was seeing it for the first time, which in a way was true. He was now looking at my house with new eyes, the eyes of a man who knows the true value of things. That's a beautiful antique dresser, he said, pointing to a piece of furniture that Vanessa had once called old junk. It's really 18th century from the Vanderbilt estate, I confirmed. Sit down, Randall. Would you like some coffee? Yes, please. I went to the kitchen, set the cups on a tray, added homemade cookies. When I came back, Randall was standing by the bookshelf, looking at the pictures. I never noticed this one, he said, pointing to a picture of me standing next to a famous French chef against the Eiffel Tower. That's in Paris. Yes, 5 years ago, a culinary conference. I set the tray on the coffee table and we sat down. There was an awkward pause. Mom, Randall finally began, I don't know where to begin. Everything that happened yesterday, it's just like it came out of the blue. For you, I remarked. I've lived with that knowledge all my life. Why didn't you ever tell me? There was resentment in his voice. I am your son. At first I wanted you to grow up with the right values, not counting on my money. Then, it just wasn't the right time. And after you married Vanessa, it became obvious that you judge people by very superficial criteria. Randall lowered his eyes. I let Vanessa influence me more than she should have, on my attitude toward you. Yes, I agreed without accusation in my voice. You stopped seeing me and started looking at me through her eyes. I'm sorry, he looked up. Really sorry. I looked at my son carefully. There was genuine remorse in his eyes, but I knew the situation was more complicated than that. Randall, I accept your apology, but we both realize that's not the only reason you're here. He sighed. Vanessa is furious and scared. She's afraid you'll cut us out of the will. What about you? I asked her bluntly. Do you only care about the inheritance? No, he looked insulted. I just, I don't want to lose my mother, especially now that I'm starting to realize who you really are. I took the cup, sipped my coffee slowly. You know, Randall, in the last 10 years, you've never once asked me about my work, about my travels, about my friends. You'd call on holidays, sometimes drop by for half an hour, always with the look of a man doing an unpleasant chore. I thought you were, just an old mom living a humble life, that there was nothing to talk to you about. Is that all I meant to you? Old mom? Not a person with her own interests, accomplishments, dreams? Randall blushed. When you phrase it like that, it sounds awful. Because it is awful. I set the cup aside. Randall, I'm revising my will. It's been decided. He's pale. Mom, please don't do anything rash. We can fix this. I didn't say I was disinheriting you completely, I interrupted. But it will be distributed differently than originally planned. How? He held his breath. First, the bulk of my share of Hutton Gastronomy would go to Eddie and the other key employees. They've earned it through their loyalty and labor. Randall nodded, although it was obvious that this news did not please him. Second, I'm setting up a trust fund for Zoe. It will cover her education at the college of her choice, plus seed money for her first business or creative project. But there's a condition. She must develop her talent in photography. Vanessa will object, Randall pointed out. It's not her decision, I said firmly. I've seen Zoe's work. She has a real gift that Vanessa is trying to stifle with her ambition. And what about, Vanessa and me? I took a deep breath. You'll get the house when I die. It goes to you, not Vanessa. If you divorce, it's still yours. Plus a certain amount of money enough to live comfortably, but not the luxury Vanessa craves. And Vanessa gets nothing? She'll get what she's legally entitled to as my son's wife, nothing more. Randall looked thoughtful. She won't take it lightly. I know she won't. And I don't care. I shrugged. Randall, I will no longer adjust to the expectations of people who don't respect me. I understand. He was quiet for a moment. What should I tell her? The truth. That I'm reviewing the will and my decisions are based on how I've been treated over the last 10 years. That I'm not going to reward disrespect and condescension. She's going to pressure me to convince you to change your mind. I know she will. And this will be a test for you, Randall. Whose side will you choose, wife who sees you only as a purse and status, or mother who always wanted the best for you? He flinched at my words. You've always been straightforward, Mom. Life's too short for games, Randall. I've spent too much time hiding a part of myself. I won't do it again. We finished our coffee in silence. When Randall was about to leave, I walked him to the door. Mom, he stopped at the door. Can I come over next Sunday? Just to talk. Learn about your business. About how you built it. Sure, I smiled. I'd be happy to tell you. He hugged me awkwardly and walked away. I watched him get in his car and drive away, and for the first time in years, I felt hopeful that our relationship could change for the better. Eddie called that evening. How was the meeting with your son? He asked. Better than I expected. He seemed genuinely remorseful. But Vanessa, that's a different story. Are you really going to rewrite the will? Yes, I was pretty sure. I'll call my lawyer tomorrow. Eddie was silent for a moment, then asked, What about your offer about Italy? Is it still on the table? I smiled. We'd been talking about spending a month in Tuscany, exploring the local cuisine and wineries. Maybe even open a small branch restaurant there. Of course we have. I think now is the time. We need to live in the present, not put life on hold. Then I'll start preparing. Summer's the perfect time for Tuscany. After I talked to Eddie, I sat on the veranda for a long time watching the sun go down. A strange sense of freedom filled me. It was as if I'd shed the mask I'd been wearing for too long and could finally breathe. 3 days after my conversation with Randall, Vanessa showed up on my doorstep, unannounced, at lunchtime. I was just working on my reports when the doorbell rang insistently. Vanessa stood on the doorstep in a designer suit, with perfect hair and makeup, but her eyes betrayed nervousness. Gloria, we need to talk, she said instead of greeting me. Come on in. I stepped back, letting her into the house. Vanessa came in, this time looking around with a different set of eyes. She noticed the antique furniture, the original paintings, the quality materials. All the things she'd previously considered old-fashioned and cheap. "It's a beautiful house," she finally said. I hadn't noticed some of the details before. "Thank you." I gestured for her to sit down. "Tea? Coffee?" "No, thank you." She sank to the edge of the couch. "I came to talk about the situation." "What kind of situation?" I sat down across from her. Vanessa took a deep breath. "Randall told me about your conversation, about the will. That's what I thought. Gloria, I realize that I haven't always been fair to you, and I want to apologize." I looked at her closely. Vanessa looked remorseful, but her eyes betrayed her true motives. She wasn't sorry for her attitude toward me. She was sorry that she risked losing access to my money. "Vanessa," I smiled softly, "let's not pretend. You're not here because you're sorry. You're here because you're afraid of losing your inheritance." She flinched, but quickly pulled herself together. "That's not true. I've really rethought my attitude. After what happened at the restaurant." "You've changed your attitude about my money," I corrected. "Not about me as a person." Vanessa blushed. "That's not fair." "No, Vanessa. What's unfair is the way you treated me for 10 years, the way you turned my son and granddaughter against me, how you looked down on me, thinking I was a failure just because I didn't wear designer logos and brag about my accomplishments." "I was wrong." She lowered her eyes. "I admit it." "You will now that you know I'm rich." I shook my head. "I wondered if you'd admit it if I were a simple pensioner living on a modest income." Vanessa didn't have an answer. "Look," I softened my tone, "I don't hold a grudge against you. I really don't. But I'm also not going to pretend that a sincere, warm relationship between us is possible. Too much water under the bridge." "What do you mean?" She seemed tense. "I mean that we can maintain a polite, formal relationship for Randall and Zoe's sake, but no more than that. And yes, I'm revising the will, just like I told Randall." "But that's not fair," Vanessa blurted out. "Just because of a few unfortunate comments." "A few?" I raised an eyebrow. "Vanessa, you've been dismissive of me for years. You called my house a museum of old things. You called my clothes old lady clothes. My career is just cooking. You suggested I move into a nursing home. You mocked my handmade gifts. You forbade Zoe from developing her talent in photography." "It's not a few unfortunate comments, Vanessa. It's a pattern of neglect that went on for years." She went pale. "I didn't mean to—" "That's exactly what you wanted," I interrupted her. "You wanted to feel superior, successful, modern, and you used me as a point of comparison to emphasize your superiority." Vanessa stood up, her hands shaking. "You can't do this to us. Randall is your only son." "That's why I'm not disinheriting him completely," I replied calmly. "He'll get the house and a certain amount of money, and Zoe will get an education and startup capital for her talent. But the bulk of my business will go to the people who helped me build it and who share my values." "Your lover, you mean?" Vanessa couldn't contain the venom in her voice. "Eddie is my partner in every sense of the word." I didn't raise my voice. "He's been there for me through the hardest times. He believed in me when no one else did. He never judged me on external trappings. Yes, he deserves my inheritance more than the woman who spent 10 years thinking I was a poor loser." Vanessa clenched her fists. "You're going to regret this. Randall won't let you—" "Randall already knows about my decision," I interrupted her calmly. "And unlike you, he's accepted it with understanding. Maybe because he's starting to realize how much time he's wasted letting you shape his attitude toward me." Vanessa grabbed her bag. "This isn't over." "It's the end for me." I stood up. "I won't pretend anymore, Vanessa. I won't play the role of the poor mother-in-law that you and Randall can patronize. I'm going to be me, a successful businesswoman who built an empire from scratch and who knows her worth." Vanessa skipped out of the house, slamming the door loudly. I sighed and went back to work. This conversation was inevitable, and I'm glad it happened. All the cards were now on the table. The next day, I visited my lawyer and officially changed my will as I had planned. In the evening, I called Zoe and invited her for a tour of the Hutton Reserve kitchen. To my surprise, she agreed, despite Vanessa's objections. On Sunday, Randall came alone, as promised. We spent several hours talking about my business, how I built it, the challenges and triumphs. For the first time in years, my son listened to me with genuine interest. Something began to change in our relationship, although I knew it would be a long road to rebuilding trust. A month later, Eddie and I flew to Italy. Tuscany welcomed us with bright sunshine, vineyards spread across the hills, and the promise of new opportunities. We spent the entire summer there, studying the local cuisine, talking to winemakers and farmers, and developing the concept for our new restaurant. Randall called every week inquiring about our plans, talking about Zoe, who had begun to take photography seriously and had even won a school competition. He didn't talk much about Vanessa, but I could sense that their relationship was becoming strained. Not my problem. My son has to work out his own family issues. In September, we returned to Wilmington with new ideas and plans. I organized a master class in Italian cooking for the young chefs in our chain, and I suddenly found that teaching gave me great pleasure. Sharing knowledge, seeing the students' eyes light up when they learn a new technique or recipe, it gave new meaning to my work. By Christmas, I started a mentorship program for aspiring chefs, especially those who couldn't afford the expensive education at culinary schools. It was my way of giving back to the community and the industry that had given me so much. Randall and Zoe came over for Christmas dinner. Vanessa declined, citing other plans. We spent a quiet but warm evening. Zoe showed me her pictures and told me that she had decided to go to art college. Randall, to my surprise, supported her decision, despite Vanessa's objections. In February, when Eddie and I celebrated Hutton Reserve's 25th anniversary, Randall came alone and stayed after the party for a serious conversation. "Mom," he said, looking me in the eye, "I've filed for divorce." I was not surprised. It had been obvious for the past few months that their marriage was cracking at the seams. "Are you sure?" "Yes," he nodded. After everything that had happened, I started to see Vanessa through different eyes. I realized that it wasn't me she loved, but the lifestyle I could provide for her, especially after she found out about your condition. "I'm sorry," I really sympathized with him. "Don't be," he smiled weakly. "I think I've known it for a long time. I just didn't want to admit it. Your honesty helped me see the truth." "What about Zoe?" I asked, worried about my granddaughter. "She's staying with me." "Actually, it was her choice. She said she was tired of her mom trying to control every aspect of her life." I nodded. Zoe had always been a smart girl with a strong character. Spring brought new changes. Eddie and I made our relationship official, though it wasn't a secret to most of the staff. Randall finalized the divorce and moved into a new apartment with Zoe. Vanessa tried to contest my new will by hiring an attorney, but quickly realized the futility of those attempts. In May, exactly a year after that memorable dinner at Hutton Reserve, I sat on the veranda of my house, sipping my morning coffee. The sun was warming, the birds were singing, and I felt lighthearted. Eddie joined me, carrying fresh pastries from our bakery. "What are you thinking about?" he asked, sitting down next to me. "About how much has changed in a year," I said, "and about how sometimes you just have to be yourself without trying to live up to other people's expectations. You've always been you, Gloria." He took my hand. "It's just that not everyone could appreciate it." I smiled, looking out at the garden where my favorite roses were beginning to bloom. Life went on, full of new possibilities and freedom to be myself, without masks, without pretense, without compromising on what really mattered. Later that afternoon, I received a text from Zoe. She had won a scholarship to a prestigious photography school and had attached her latest work. Looking at the talented, in-depth images, I felt proud and hopeful. Perhaps my sudden coming out of the shadows a year ago gave her the courage to follow her passion without worrying about what others would say. Randall was changing too. He started calling more often, taking an interest in my business, even offering to help with financial planning for a new restaurant in Tuscany. Our relationship would never be perfect. Too many years were lost, but we were moving in the right direction. As for Vanessa, I hear she has found a new up-and-coming man, a successful attorney, and has moved to North Wilmington, to one of those columned and gilded houses she always dreamed of. I wish her happiness, sincerely. Maybe someday she'll realize that real value is not in logos and status symbols, but in authenticity and integrity. And me? I continued to live life to the fullest, running the business, traveling with Eddie, sharing my experiences with young chefs, enjoying my relationship with my son and granddaughter who finally saw the real me. At 66, I felt freer and happier than ever. Perhaps the most important lesson from that memorable evening at Hutton Reserve was the realization: it's never too late to drop the mask and start living life on your own terms, surrounding yourself with people who appreciate you for who you are, not for what you can give them. And you should never, ever have to endure neglect from those who are supposed to love and respect you. After all, as the old cook's wisdom says, it's not the quantity of ingredients that matters, but their quality and the love with which they are put together. The same applies to life.